Karma. Each showcase is a chance for us to provide a fortnightly update of our progress on the project of the data access pathways. So this showcase, John is going to give us an update on the pilot for the POD, which is the online tool that we developed to connect people to each other and information. And then Lisa, she's going to talk about the access process, which is the second pain point that we identified to tackle. And then Tim going to give us an update on the IDI future state. We are happy to hear questions, comments, songs, even for our YouTube channels viewers. We can take your questions if you want. I'll hand it over to John.
Thanks, Anna. So the culmination of the 5-week trial of using POD, using the housing data slice, we ran a survey of participants. The results were essentially that the concept was sound and people could see the potential value of POD in their work. Some of the feedback from those who didn't use POD much was that the topic we chose was not immediately relevant to their work. The change of government meant some reprioritisation had occurred for them, or there could be other reasons. So we began to explore about half a dozen topic areas in terms of the number of people interested in the range of low, medium or high, number of people we know are using the IDI, what content is available, is there an established community, are there champions, and any known groups. And we ended up focusing on 3 areas which are closely related around wellbeing. They are topical and cover a range of data sets. So POD will be extended to cover housing, health and child poverty. We'll be inviting another 50 people to join the community of users. We want to see more people sharing, engaging, and we're hoping for some community-led activity. For next steps, we need to identify and prepare some content for POD and determine who we could invite. In addition, the trialists did identify some changes that they would like made to POD, and we'll see what is possible within the constraints of the software that we're using.
Cool. As you may recall from the last showcase, we started looking at the second problem, which was the access process to accessing microdata. When we talked about the current process last time for applying for access to microdata and how it reflects the lack of trust between Stats New Zealand, the researchers and the suppliers, coupled with the fact that the roles and responsibilities around what reviewers do aren't that clear, means that there's a lot of duplication across the process. The work that we've done to understand the customer journeys, the pain points, and draw out the themes around the process currently presents us with a process that is costly in terms of time, and it's a major barrier to entry for customers, and it's actually impacted our reputation. The process is one that reflects a lack of trust and empowerment. And so this has required us to confront the process at a strategic level. So we've taken the evidence that we've collected from our customer feedback interviews to different levels of management to present bigger questions like, what is Stats New Zealand's role and responsibility and what's not? And what hat should we wear? So while the organisation considers these questions, we've cracked on with the access problem. And so we've been narrowing down on a specific problem we want to solve, looking at this part of the second diamond. And have decided to focus on the review processes. Working through the ideation phase, we went wide and came up with solutions to the problem. And having chosen a concept, we'll start to prototype the solutions. We've also begun to feed back some of the insights that we've learned back to the integrated data unit. And so we ran a workshop last week where we started to work on gathering ideas for solutions to some of the pain points of the access process. So that the integrated data team, along with our support from the IDI2 team, can start to try and make smaller changes and streamline the process and make improvements. And so we can start to really sort of remove some of the pains and improve the customer experience. So this is our last showcase for the year. And so the Data Access Pathways team would like to reflect back on the journey that we've been on so far over the last 5 months. It's been exciting. We've learned new ways of working and problem solving and working in a truly collaborative way. We really enjoy the process, the approach of the build, measure and learn, and having the freedom to experiment and try something out and then learn from it. While working in a tight team is really awesome, changes in the team shape and size due to new teams coming onto the IDI2 project, or people being away on holidays or being sick, or people moving off the project either part-time or permanently, has been really challenging. It's been a particular challenge because we are the only team in stats working in this way at the moment. And so having the team shrink and expand has taken some time to get used to. More than it does normally, because we work really close together. When the team changes, you have to go back to the storming, forming, norming, performing phases. And we also have a single focus and a single goal, which means everyone in the team is working on the same thing and working towards the same goals. And so you really notice it when the team changes, particularly when it shrinks. Sometimes you feel a bit knocked back because you're used to ticking off so many tasks and achieving a lot in your week. And so it takes a lot to pick yourself up and adapt to the change. It's been a real learning experience and part of the Agile journey, one which we've become quite good at. And despite the challenges, I have personally really enjoyed working in this fun and dynamic way. So on this note, I'll flip to Tim, who's going to talk about the IDI future state.
Thanks, Lisa. So last time you would have heard from Margaret and I talking about we were just coming into the tail end of our interviews and we talked a little bit about our early findings. So this time around, I'm going to just quickly touch on who we talked to, the persona breakdown within that, what we found out. So Benny, Scott, Margaret and I did a bunch of thematic analysis and presented that back to Anna. And then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do about it. 44 interviews across about 3 weeks with a rough split between internal and external. Ricky, if you just pop forward just one. Within those 2 groups, they split not quite neatly, bit of overlap within the groups of which personas they fell into, but 2 personas on either side. So internally, we had the integrators, which were people that actually do the integration of data, as well as all the people that provide the support around the edges. And also within stats, there are people that want to make official statistics out of integrated data, which is itself a very specific need and carries its own problems and challenges. So we broke that down into a persona itself. On the other side, the providers, the people that give us the data that makes the IDI, and the experience they go through, and the doers, the people that actually do stuff with the IDI, whether it's creating policy advice, research, whatever. So just quickly in terms of the problems that these groups face, I'll get onto that in a sec. But anyway, the integrators, big problems that they faced was the time that they spent integrating data and the drudge, the manual processes involved. The official statistics side, the IDI isn't quite built for reproducibility, and it's not as reliable as they would like it to be. And also the idea of accessing it from within stats. The doers side, very similar to what we found in Access Pathways and not very surprising. People want it faster. They want data out of the IDI faster. And the capability, so accessing the IDI, being a person that can do that, that's a CV skill, and that's in demand across government, and that creates a barrier to entry as well. So that came up. And on the provider side, speed again was a theme. People want a shorter time between feeding the data in and it being accessible by their teams in the organisation. But also coming out in that, the idea of trusting in stats and the exploring ideas whether they can convey to their clients that it's okay to put the data in the IDI. Now we can go on, okay. So we had 5 key themes that came out, which we've rearranged this way because when we did the analysis, that's kind of how they slotted together, but I'll just quickly go through them before I explain that. So purpose, talking both internally and across government and research and private sector, we had varying views of what the IDI is for and what the primary use is. We also had kind of varying expectations about what the value proposition of the IDI is, which feeds into being able to convince people to put their data in the IDI in the first place. In terms of trust, which underpins everything, there was a clear view that stats should be the right place for it. There's a lot of trust in stats as an organisation, but there's also queries about whether the data ethics framework or governance we have kind of across the sector is fit for purpose. And also those ideas of clients being able to trust the agencies who are putting their data in the IDI. Down the, I guess, the more focused end of it, capability, which I mentioned just before, content. Unsurprisingly, people want more data, they want it faster, and they want it better documented. And process was more of an internal view. Externally, people just care about the speed. They don't really care about how it's integrated, but internally there were people honing on the manual processes that we use, the amount of drudge, the amount of time that you spend integrating data when you could be doing something else that's more fulfilling. And externally as well, having some visibility over the process of integration and also visibility over the prioritization of data that we choose to integrate into the IDI. To explain the weird diagram, we found when we were doing the analysis that the capability, content, process could all get pulled into multiple directions, and unless you actually set a clear process for a clear purpose for what you wanted the IDI to be, you just get spread very, very thin. So using the idea of purpose to kind of hone in on what decisions you should be making about building capability across the sector, about choosing what parts of those to engage with. So within capability, for instance, yes, you could go, well, what do we need to do to build capability in the sector? But you also need to ask, well, is it Stats' job to build capability in the sector? Like, who should we be relying on for that? So, and just one more slide across. So, all things going well, we work out what the purpose of the IDI is for. And from that, we can, and this will be feeding into Anna's decisions around redesign and further abroad, but making the right calls about what sort of people and projects you use the IDI for, what sort of data we're prioritising and asking for, or and that the process actually meets that demand and it can scale. So what we're doing about it. So Marga and Benny and Scott have gone back to their old lives or new life and policy in Scott's case, but so it's just me at the moment. So I've reintegrated myself with the Access Pathways team. So we're sitting together using the same board, which now has 2 speeds because we're doing strategy thinking and them knocking out a heck of a lot more than I am. But the first step will be to build a bit of a straw man, an idea of what the purpose could be, or what we understand the purpose of IDI to be. So that's based on interviews we've had with key people, as well as stuff we've already written about the IDI and going back into why it was set up in the first place. And just putting that in front of people and seeing what they think about it and seeing if it still resonates. Because it's really important that internally Stats understands what the purpose of the IDI is for, because if we don't get it, then no one outside is going to get it. Running parallel to that, the idea of evidence-based policy, what we've found throughout the Access Pathways work, as well as this work, is that the speed of the policy cycle runs completely differently to the speed of research within the IDI. Being able to surface data, ask questions about it, bring it to a minister, socialise it, and then go back in doesn't really match how people currently use the IDI. So doing a bit of research into the time pressures that policy advisors and analysts face in that section. Finally, and on the idea of bringing things back together, the Access Pathways work and this work have created a big list of problems that stats could solve or should solve, or it's just a really big list. So what we've spent some time doing is pulling that all together, pulling together maybe about 20, 30 items in a backlog for Anna to look at, and we've themed those up against kind of the different parts, whether it's process, whether it's customer experience. So that should hopefully help make things a bit easier to prioritise in the short to medium term in this sort of IDI. I don't know what are we just calling this IDI 2? Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, I've run out of things to say, so I think we're doing questions now, and Ricky's doing that. Yeah.
What's the question, Ricky?
Any questions?
Nothing.
So you're talking about Anna making the decisions.
Oh,
What do
no.
you mean by that?
not so much that. I think it's just around creating a list for Anna to take to the right people in the organization to make informed decisions about what are the priorities.
Yeah.
So many things we want to take.
Because some of them will be, there are definitely things, particularly in the future state stuff around purpose, that will be going up higher and higher. So Andrea, Sarah, Liz, to a certain extent.
I mean, it
So,
starts
yeah.
with Anna as manager of
Yeah.
that area, and obviously there are things that you can answer, and there are
Yeah.
things that are, because I mean, one of my questions similarly was going to be, with future state, we wanted to understand what people want or believe things to be.
Yeah.
But then of course we have budgets and things moving forward, so that doesn't mean you can't do things. There's different ways to take those forward. There's also things that are at a system level, things that SATs can do, things that other people can do. So
Yeah.
this next stage is the work that you're doing going to surface those. I mean,
Yeah.
you sort of noticed that there were some questions about, what is SATs role, what should SATs do? So that's going to come in this next part.
Yes.
Work through.
That's the plan. Yeah, and because I think having that backlog there and being able to break things off means that, so one of the earlier things that we decided to break off the list was the idea of the processes that are currently being run on Surface Pros to validate data and load it into the IDI in the first place. Surface Pros aren't built for that, but someone's already doing something about it. So being able to loop in with that work and kind of have those discussions about how this team might be able to help with that, or whether it needs to help at all. But if we don't have that list there, you run into situations where we can charge ahead where it's already been done, or maybe we're going in the wrong direction. But if there's kind of a full list and we have that visibility and is able to share that out and up, things work better.
I was just going to ask about that.
Yeah.
It would be helpful for us to see it, so where some of the work that we're doing
Yeah.
actually feeds into that.
Um,
Because there's obviously stuff that you guys won't be
Yeah.
aware that the team's up to.
It only came into existence very, very recently, but yeah, I think that's a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's possible it kind of highlights a wider issue around the communication between the ID unit and IDI2,
Mm.
just making sure we know what you're doing, you know
Yeah.
what we're doing, and if we're doing stuff that's aligned, we're doing stuff actually with you. So it's
And I think it's broader, obviously, with the organisation, which is
Well, yeah.
the sort of getting the conversations out there so people therefore can understand and ask the right questions and connecting at the right places. And so that obviously got visibility here. There's other things going on that we might not be aware of, and it's making sure we also connect with those.
This the last couple of showcases. So it might have come up before, and also might be an NA question. But the keyboard things that you guys collected across all of the different interviews on the exit pathways and the IO2 at the read site, the key themes and things listed that you guys have written with things, not specific works that's going on. But are those things available somewhere we share?
They are available. I'm
Yeah,
happy to share them. They're just at the moment they will be in a format that's not that tidy and easy for you to digest. So
I don't think people mind about what
That's-
minutes are, it's
yeah.
just, you know, the visibility.
We just use Google Docs, it's just in Google Docs.
yeah.
yeah, so we'll take that back. And
Yeah,
make it happen.
probably put it somewhere to,
Yep.
Yeah, I guess it would be quite good to know what kind of like good, the bad, possibly.
We're also happy to run you guys through, there's quite a lot of data.
Yeah.
Go through the different personas and different things, analysis with that, so you guys want to do that.
I think sort of putting my Anna hat on, you know, what are the things that we always need in this process, and why we have the showcases was trying to get information out there, because the information going through the edge isn't necessarily collected in the way that the rest of the organisation consumes data, which back to Lisa's point of doing things differently. So it's finding those ways to sort of to share it without creating extra work.
Yeah.
So, you know, trying to make sure that we can pick up things like, you know, Google Docs and bring them into the things that we can use. So we can certainly try and help with that as well.
I have an access question. So in the last showcase, you talked about how sometimes access applications drop off. They don't make it all the way through the process. So I was wondering if you managed to find any patterns around whether there's a common point where they tend to drop off, or at certain types of applications that tend to drop off, or you know why were they dropping off?
I'm not sure. We know that some applications get put on hold. Some applications get submitted before like funding's been put through, things like that.
Yeah, and it tends to be at the front end.
Yeah.
When people meet with the microdata access team, some of those things are teased out.
Yeah.
And it might be, look, you're just not ready, you know, it could be a capability gap, you know, people thinking they can use Excel with the IDI.
Or that you can't even, like, the data in the IDI is not suitable for the research they want to do, not feasible.
So in that case, it might be that we've offered them other options, like easier options for what they want to do, or they want to do something really different.
Yeah. One of the things with PIT is that it's hard to know what's in the IDI from the outside. So it's that process in itself is pretty difficult if you apply and you don't know what's inside. You have to tell us what you want, but you know what you want to do, you go inside. So it's that's probably part of the reason people put in the application and not progress further. Any other questions?
No, there's nothing, yeah.
So, Lisa, when you're talking about the strategic side that the organisation needs to think about, was it alluding to a little bit? No.
We did our own, yeah. So we've taken it to Sarah and Andrea just to pose questions and get them thinking about this, because it has come up as a major theme.
Yeah.
And then so while they're considering that, we're sort of moving on to some, providing some solutions, potential solutions.
So what's the plan for it?
To be honest, in terms of those big questions, they're bigger than we can answer on our own.
Yeah,
So
so I just wonder
that's what Sarah's having to think about is where and how we approach those.
Yeah.
So we've had initial conversations with the exec team. That's only sort of lightly just to get them thinking. But it is very much we're getting to those areas that some of them are stats in a wider system sense. Some of them are actually the system itself, not what the stats can do. We don't have any, we don't know the data that like the suppliers do, so there's limits as to what we can do. So it's how we need to put it together and how it might work. So that's really why the team raised it, so that we think about what is the best process to go through here.
I've not meant to put you on spot, but I'm just like trying to find out when we sort of say that they're bigger than.
Well, it's a bit like Lisa's saying, it's like, what is our role? What steps part in the process? What are the things that it's in our remit to have a say on, and which are the bits that aren't, and therefore how do we get clarity over what those are? And obviously you need to understand what people want to be able to do to then try and tackle it appropriately. So it's those, it's the higher level questions, of which again we can't just answer on our own. So
Is this part of the system leadership?
some of it is, and some of it's broader still.
So they thinking about that in their system leadership space?
So it's things like Tim raised around things like the capability. So that is an angle that's already being picked up in the system partnership space. Is that, do we leave it in that space to take things to a level?
Or do we
and see
fold it
where that
into
goes
design?
to? Does it lead something? Yeah. How the connecting up the dots.
Anyone else? Cool. Thanks very much for coming.
Have a Merry Christmas.